I did not seize power to make headlines. I did it because my people were starving while politicians debated term limits.
Ibrahim Traore imagined before the African Union, a father is preparing a throne, a son wears a uniform he's never earned, and a nation once born of revolution is being quietly reshaped into a monarchy dressed in camouflage. For years, Uganda was the West's favorite project. Yoweri Museveni, the rebel-turned-president, was hailed as a visionary reformer. But vision doesn't last forever, especially when it calcifies into dynasty. Now, 36 years later, the cracks are no longer whispers. The president's son, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, isn't just climbing the ranks, he's being crowned before our eyes. Not through merit, not through battle, but through birthright. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, a 36-year-old captain named Ibrahim Traore is doing the unthinkable, confronting imperialism, cutting off corruption, and rejecting Western tutelage. His revolution wasn't inherited. It was earned with sweat, sacrifice, and solidarity. So we ask, what happens when one African leader earns the people's trust while another inherits his father's throne? And what happens when the people start to notice, if you still believe in justice, not just for one nation, but for all, stay with us, because what you're about to hear won't make the evening news. I did not step forward to make noise. I stepped forward because leadership should serve the people, not outlast them. Ibrahim Traore imagined before the African Union. Once upon a time, Uganda was a symbol of renewal, a nation that rose from conflict under a leader who promised change. But with time, promises grow old, and power, when held too long, starts to shift from service to succession. Today, whispers of that shift are growing louder. General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, son of Uganda's long-serving president, is rising quickly through the military ranks. Some call it preparation, others a sign of transition. Yet in neighboring Burkina Faso, a different story is unfolding. Captain Ibrahim Traore, a young leader without pedigree or privilege, has become a symbol of grassroots transformation. One was shaped by history, the other by heritage. And across Africa, especially among the youth people, are beginning to ask, is leadership something to be earned or something to be passed down? If you've ever believed that service should be earned, not inherited, if you've ever hoped for leadership that listens, then stay with us. Because what's happening in Uganda may soon echo far beyond its borders. Uganda's modern history begins, like many others across the continent, with a revolution. In 1986, a young commander named Yoweri Museveni led a successful resistance against a series of troubled regimes. At the time, his message was powerful. Africa's problem isn't its people, but leaders who stay too long in power. That promise struck a chord. Museveni was seen as a reformer, a new kind of African statesman. Under his leadership, Uganda stabilized its economy, improved, and for a time it looked like democracy had taken root. But decades passed and the system began to shift. Term limits were removed, age caps were lifted, the circle around power grew smaller, and the institutions that once promised checks and balances became quieter. To many Ugandans today, especially the younger generation, the sense of renewal has faded. They see the same names, the same ideas, and the same challenges. Unemployment remains high, political expression can be risky, and the space for open debate has narrowed. Meanwhile, a new figure has emerged in public life, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, the president's son. He's risen steadily through Uganda's military ranks, at times drawing public attention through social media. His profile is growing not only as a soldier, but as someone rumored to be part of a long-term succession plan. Across the border, however, another young leader is writing a different kind of story. Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso came to prominence in 2022, not by inheritance, but by direct action. He has since drawn attention for his bold positions on economic sovereignty, youth empowerment, and international independence. The contrast between the two men has sparked quiet conversations across the continent, not about personalities, but about what kind of leadership Africa wants in the 21st century. This is not about condemnation. It's about reflection. What happens when a leader becomes the establishment they once challenged? And what happens when the next generation begins to seek something more? History teaches us that every era must decide what kind of future it will tolerate. Uganda is now facing that question, not through crisis, but through quiet decisions made one step at a time. In May 2025, a tweet from Uganda's top general sparked national conversation, not just for what it said, but for what it suggested. General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, son of President Yoweri Museveni and commander of Uganda's armed forces, publicly praised Burkina Faso's young leader, Captain Ibrahim Traore. His words were brief, but weighty. I support the anti-imperialist position of President Ibrahim Traore. His views are like ours. On the surface, it seemed like a gesture of solidarity. But to many Ugandans, it felt like a signal, a subtle but powerful hint that General Muhoozi saw himself as part of a new generation of African leadership. It wasn't the first time Muhoozi made headlines. His journey through Uganda's military ranks has been anything but ordinary. After attending military academies abroad, he returned home to take command of Uganda's Special Forces, one of the country's most elite military units. His rise was swift. In just a few years, he was promoted to brigadier general, then major general, and eventually a full general. To his supporters, Muhoozi's career is a testament to preparation and modern leadership. But critics, including some within the military, quietly question the pace and nature of his advancement. They point to the fact that his father remains commander-in-chief and that few other officers have risen as quickly or with such visibility. The idea that Uganda may be preparing for a political transition involving the president's son is no longer just speculation. As early as 2013, a respected former general, David Sayusa, warned of what he described as a succession project. His concerns, published in an open letter, suggested that top military officers opposing the plan could be sidelined or replaced. The government's response was swift. Media houses that reported on the letter were temporarily shut down. General Sayusa eventually left the country for a time. When he returned, he was arrested and charged with insubordination. It was a moment that made many pause, not just because of the message, but because of the reaction to it. Since then, Muhoozi's public profile has only grown. He often uses social media to share his views, sometimes sparking debate both at home and abroad. While some of his posts are seen as lighthearted or symbolic, others have led to real-world consequences, including diplomatic tensions. Yet through it all, his position in Uganda's leadership has remained secure. In 2022, after a period of public controversy, he was promoted to full general. Then, in 2024, he was appointed Chief of Defense Forces, the highest military role in the country. To understand why this matters, we have to look beyond individual ambitions. In many parts of Africa, military leadership has historically been both a force for change and a source of concern. In the past, coups were often associated with instability, but more recently, some African youth have begun to see them differently, not as disruptions, but as interventions in systems that no longer reflect public will. Captain Ibrahim Traore's rise in Burkina Faso is one example. He didn't come from a powerful family. He didn't inherit command. He emerged from within the ranks at a time when many in the country felt their voices were being lost. That difference between inheritance and earned trust is at the heart of today's discussion. Uganda remains a strong and resilient nation. Its institutions have weathered storms. But like any democracy, its strength depends on public confidence in the transparency of power, the fairness of opportunity, and the merit of leadership. When leadership feels predetermined, that confidence can be tested. General Muhoozi may have a vision for Uganda. He may genuinely admire leaders like Traore. But admiration alone does not equal alignment. Traore rose through crisis, called by duty. Muhoozi has risen through legacy, shaped by proximity to power. The question facing Uganda, and perhaps other African nations, is this: in a generation hungry for change, what kind of leadership will they truly follow, and what kind of legacy will they choose to leave behind? In many ways, Uganda's political journey has been shaped by stability. After decades of conflict and transitions, the country has remained relatively peaceful under President Yoweri Museveni's long tenure. But peace, while valuable, sometimes carries a quieter tension, especially when it begins to resemble permanence. Today, that tension sits at the heart of a national conversation. Is Uganda preparing for a handover of leadership, not through elections, but through legacy? The signs are subtle but consistent. Over the years, the president has gradually adjusted Uganda's constitution first to remove term limits, then to lift age restrictions. Each change, while legal, has had the effect of extending his time in office and concentrating influence at the center. Meanwhile, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba has steadily become more visible, not just in military roles, but in public discourse. His social media presence, interviews, and statements suggest more than just military command. They hint at a future in which he may step into a civilian leadership role. Some Ugandans view this as continuity, a way to preserve progress and avoid disruption. Others see it differently, not as a transition, but as the quiet rise of a political dynasty. To be clear, Uganda is not alone in facing this question. Across the world, families have played central roles in politics. From the Kennedys in the US to the Gandhis in India, political legacies can be powerful, but they also require transparency, trust, and a clear mandate from the people. In Uganda's case, the concern is not just about family ties. It's about process. In 2013, General David Sejusa's open letter raised a now familiar warning that Uganda's leadership was moving toward a structure in which power could be passed along within a family. The letter also alleged that officers opposing this direction were being quietly removed or marginalized. The letter triggered a response that raised more questions than it answered. Media outlets were temporarily shut down. Journalists were questioned. The focus shifted from the content of the letter to the act of publishing it. In the end, the message was clear: some conversations were too sensitive to be held publicly. In the years since, moments of criticism have been met with similar caution. Public figures and journalists who express concern about Uganda's political direction often find themselves under scrutiny. And yet, the public remains engaged. Youth-led movements, civic groups, and opposition voices continue to advocate for open dialogue. Their message is not one of division, but of clarity. Leadership should be earned, not inherited. Power should be a responsibility, not a reward. That's what makes the comparison to Burkina Faso so compelling. Captain Ibrahim Traore didn't come from a political family. He didn't have a predetermined path. He stepped into leadership during a time of deep national frustration when many citizens felt their country was being shaped by outside forces more than by their own will. Traore's stance on national resources, foreign influence, and youth participation has earned him growing respect across the continent. The difference isn't about personality, it's about process. When leadership comes from within, through shared struggle, earned respect, and transparent values, it inspires something deeper than loyalty. It inspires trust. Uganda's path is still unfolding. There's time for dialogue, reform, and renewed public trust. The question is whether that path will be shaped by openness or by quiet decisions made far from public view. In the coming months, all eyes will be on how Uganda navigates this moment. Will it choose a leadership story that builds on its revolutionary roots, grounded in earned trust, national unity, and democratic values? Or will it follow a quieter script one, where titles are passed down, not handed over? Nations like people are shaped by how they choose their leaders. And Uganda, once a symbol of post-war renewal, now stands at a crossroads. Leadership doesn't change in silence. It shifts through moments, quiet conversations, difficult questions, and the growing sense that something must give. In Uganda, those moments are beginning to surface. For nearly 4 decades, President Museveni has held office with firm control over the military, the parliament, and much of the media landscape. Under his leadership, the country has seen improvements in infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Yet for many Ugandans especially, the youth political participation has felt out of reach, and calls for reform have often been met with resistance. But change, even slow change, has a way of finding its voice. Inside the Ugandan military, a new generation of officers is quietly questioning the direction of leadership. Not through dramatic gestures, but through subtle signs, hesitations, briefings, and the careful weighing of what the future might hold. Their concerns aren't always about individuals. They're about process trust and stability. Even within the president's own party, the National Resistance Movement (NRM) voices have emerged urging caution. In one public statement, Interior Minister Kahinda Otafiri noted that military rank or popularity alone does not prepare someone to lead a country. His remarks were a rare instance of public hesitation, and a reminder that loyalty does not always equal agreement. Outside government, civil society has played a key role in keeping the national conversation alive. Youth-led campaigns, journalists, academics, and religious leaders have all raised thoughtful concerns about governance, freedom of speech, and political succession. Their message is not confrontational. It's constructive. Uganda has too much to lose by silencing dialogue, and too much potential to gain by embracing it. One of the clearest signs of tension came in 2021, when a satirical writer was reportedly detained for criticizing General Muhoozi on social media. The story, including reports of mistreatment, sparked concern both inside and outside Uganda. It reminded many that the balance between security and rights remains delicate. Still, resistance doesn't always look like protest. Sometimes it looks like restraint, the quiet refusal of key institutions to endorse a path they haven't chosen. According to reports, some senior officials within the military and government have raised concerns behind closed doors about any plan to position General Muhoozi as a political successor. These concerns are not about personal ambition. They are about Uganda's legacy. Many who remember the country's difficult past, the instability of the 1970s and 80s, understand how fragile peace can be. They also understand that lasting peace must be built on public trust, fair systems, and genuine accountability. So where does that leave Uganda? Still standing, still proud, still full of potential, but also still waiting for a signal that leadership is not just a family story, but a national one. Across the continent, we see a rising generation that doesn't want chaos. They want change with care. And Uganda, like every nation, must decide whether it will face the future with openness or try to script it behind closed doors. Uganda's political crossroads is not just a national story. It's part of a wider pattern, a moment that reflects deep questions facing the African continent today. Questions of generational leadership, legitimacy, and sovereignty. To understand its broader impact, we have to zoom out. Across West and Central Africa, a wave of young, assertive military leaders has emerged. From Mali to Burkina Faso to Niger, these leaders have taken bold, sometimes controversial steps to break from foreign dependency and challenge internal corruption. While these moves haven't always followed traditional democratic paths, they have resonated with a large segment of the African youth who feel that existing systems have failed to deliver. Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso is among the most visible of this group. At just 36, His leadership has been defined by sharp breaks with former colonial powers' efforts to reclaim national resources and rhetoric that centers African dignity and independence. His popularity extends beyond his borders, not because of any political party, but because of the clarity of his stance. This is the context in which Uganda's internal dynamics are being watched. When General Muhoozi Kainerugaba posted support for Traore's anti-imperialist stance, it was more than a diplomatic gesture. It signaled that Uganda's military leadership sees itself as part of a wider generational shift. Or at least, it wants to be seen that way. But intentions and realities don't always align. While Captain Traore rose through hardship, General Muhoozi's journey has followed a very different track. His path was shaped by proximity to power, not public demand, not crisis, and not consensus. That difference matters. In geopolitics, perception shapes influence. African citizens, especially young people, are increasingly informed, connected, and conscious of the decisions being made in their name. They can tell when a movement is authentic and when it's manufactured, and they are quicker than ever to challenge narratives that feel imposed rather than chosen. This new reality creates both opportunity and challenge for leaders across Africa. Those who can tap into the values of accountability, local ownership, and economic sovereignty are finding resonance. Those who rely on legacy alone are facing greater scrutiny, not necessarily from foreign governments, but from their own populations. For Uganda, the strategic stakes are high. It remains a regional player, a partner in peacekeeping missions, and a host to millions of refugees. Its stability matters not just for its own citizens, but for neighboring countries like South Sudan, Rwanda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. If Uganda were to experience a major political transition, whether planned or contested, it could have ripple effects far beyond its borders. This is where leadership choices become strategic. A transition rooted in transparency and inclusion strengthens national legitimacy. A transition that feels inherited or unclear can invite distrust, both at home and abroad. It's worth noting that Uganda has many strengths to build on. A strong civil society, a growing economy, a well-educated population. Its future doesn't depend on rejecting the past, it depends on honoring it while embracing change, and change is coming one way or another. Whether through elections reforms or generational dialogue, Uganda, like much of Africa, is being called to ask, what does 21st century leadership look like? What does real sovereignty mean in a world shaped by global alliances and economic pressure? These aren't easy questions, but they are essential. The West, too, must be part of this reflection. For decades, countries like the US and UK supported stability over democracy in Africa. Leaders who offered regional security, economic cooperation, or counterterror support were praised regardless of domestic governance concerns. Now that model is being challenged not by revolutionaries on the streets, but by everyday Africans calling for respect, equality, and a new relationship with the world. If Uganda charts a thoughtful course through this moment, it could become a model not for inherited rule, but for generational transition grounded in principle and participation. That model wouldn't just serve Uganda. It would serve a continent that is looking to lead itself. Because Africa's future doesn't belong to any one leader. It belongs to the people who choose them or who rise in their absence. Uganda is not a headline. It's a heartbeat, steady, resilient, and full of history. For nearly 40 years, President Yoweri Museveni has led the country through conflict reconstruction and global diplomacy. But time, like history, moves forward. And the questions now facing Uganda are not just political, they are moral. What kind of leadership honors the sacrifices of the past? What kind of future do Ugandans, especially the young, want to build? When a president's son rises through the military, speaks of generational change and signals a desire to lead, the question isn't whether he has a right to run. In any democracy, he does. The question is, will that future be earned or arranged? Across Africa from Burkina Faso to Senegal, people are demanding more than titles. They're demanding trust, not slogans, substance, not legacy, legitimacy. It's not a rejection of history. It's a request for accountability. And for those watching from afar, especially in the United States, this is not just a story about another nation. It's a mirror, a chance to reflect on the relationships built over decades, the voices supported or silenced, and the role foreign powers have played in shaping outcomes across the continent. Because true partnership doesn't fear strong independent African leadership. It welcomes it. So we end with a quiet challenge, not to any one leader, but to every listener. If you've ever marched for justice, spoken out for freedom, or believed in a world where power answers to people, then you already understand what's at stake. Uganda's next chapter is unwritten, and the pen, it belongs to the people.